The old Willow house stood sentinel over the quiet, windswept town of Willow Creek, its weathered facade a stark contrast to the sleek, modern homes that had sprung up around it. Once a grand estate, it had fallen into disrepair, windows boarded up and its gardens overgrown with weeds. The locals whispered dark tales about the house, tales of ghostly apparitions and chilling screams that echoed through the night. Sarah, a young and curious journalist, was drawn to the house. Intrigued by the legends surrounding it, she decided to write a feature article about the Willow house. She contacted the current owner, an elderly man named Mr. Blackwood, who agreed to let her spend a night in the house. As Sarah stepped into the house, she felt a chill run down her spine. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the floorboards groaned beneath her feet. She made her way to the main hall, where a grand staircase led to the upper floors. As she ascended the stairs, Sarah heard a faint scratching sound coming from one of the rooms. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. Gathering her courage, she pushed open the door. The room was filled with dust and cobwebs, and a single antique rocking chair sat in the center. As she approached the chair, the scratching sound grew louder. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the room, and the rocking chair began to move. It rocked back and forth on its own, as if someone were sitting in it. Sarah's blood ran cold as she watched the chair, her eyes wide with fear. Just then, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was a woman, dressed in a white gown. Her face was pale and gaunt, and her eyes were filled with a haunting sadness. She stared at Sarah for a long moment, then vanished into the darkness. Terrified, Sarah fled the room and raced down the stairs. She burst through the front door and ran into the night, heart pounding in her chest. As she looked back at the Willow house, she saw the figure of the woman standing in one of the windows. Her eyes seemed to follow Sarah as she ran away. The next morning, Sarah returned to the Willow house to finish her article. Mr. Blackwood was waiting for her, a look of concern on his face. He told her that the woman she had seen was the ghost of his wife, Elizabeth, who had died in the house many years ago. According to Mr. Blackwood, Elizabeth had been a loving and devoted wife. However, tragedy had struck the family when their young son had drowned in a nearby pond. Elizabeth had been devastated by her son's death, and she had blamed herself for his accident. Driven by guilt and grief, she had taken her own life in the Willow house. Sarah listened to Mr. Blackwood's story with a heavy heart. She realized that the woman she had seen was not a malevolent spirit, but a lost soul trapped in the house by her own sorrow. As she left the Willow house that day, she felt a sense of peace. She knew that Elizabeth